every time you pull up to a gas station and choose between regular and premium, you're using a system invented by a small engine company in Wisconsin. A company that powered World War I trucks, World War II tanks, Texas oil fields, Apollo backup generators, and the emergency lights of the World Trade Center on September 11th. A company you've almost certainly never heard of. Their name is on none of those things, but without them, none of those things work the way they do. This is the story of Waukesha Engines, 1906. Waukesha, Wisconsin, a small city about 20 miles west of Milwaukee, known mostly for its natural spring water and not much else. Population maybe 8,000 or 9,000. The kind of place where everybody knew everybody and where the idea of becoming an industrial powerhouse would have struck most people as slightly delusional. In a Lannon stone building on North Street that used to be the office of a woolen mill, two young mechanics ran a business called the Bluefront Garage. Their names were Harry Horning and Fred Ahrens. Horning was the son of a local hardware store owner, but his bloodline traced back to Dutch industrialists. He'd studied engineering, worked on the Duluth Superior aerial lift bridge, and had a restless mind that kept circling back to one thing: internal combustion engines. Ahrens was born in Germany around 1872, came to the United States as a boy in 1883, and shared Horning's obsession. The two met while working at the Modern Steel Structural Company in Waukesha, and they bonded over a mutual conviction that the engines available in the early 1900s were, to put it plainly, terrible. And they were right. Engines at the turn of the century were unreliable machines, hard to start, especially in cold weather, prone to overheating, inconsistent in power delivery. They leaked oil and had a tendency to simply stop running for no obvious reason. Car ownership in 1906 was an act of mechanical faith. Now, officially, the Bluefront Garage was a place where you could get your car washed, stored, or repaired. That's what the sign said. That's what people paid for. But here's what was actually happening. Customers would drop off their automobiles for an overnight wash or a tune-up. And while those cars sat in the garage after dark, Horning and Ahrens would completely disassemble the engines, piece by piece. Every cylinder, every valve, every bearing, every gasket. They'd study each component, each design choice, each flaw. They'd figure out what worked, what didn't, and why. Then they'd put it all back together, tuned up and running better than before. The customers would pick up their cars the next morning, amazed at how well they ran after what they thought was just a wash job. Nobody asked them to do this, nobody paid them for it. This went on for months, possibly longer. Two guys working through the night, systematically reverse engineering every engine that rolled through their door, teaching themselves the entire state of the art by disassembly and reassembly, all because they were convinced they could build something better than anything on the market. With the financial backing of a retired farmer named Alan Stebbins, they incorporated the Waukesha Motor Company on May 29, 1906. Stebbins put up the bulk of the capital and became president. Ahrens became vice president. Horning, the engineering brain of the operation, took the title of secretary-treasurer. Other investors included Mary Wilkins Mucklestone and her sister Frances Wilkins. From the very beginning, this was a community venture, local money, local people, local ambition. Their first creation was the Model A. They also called it simply the Waukesha, a four-cylinder gasoline engine displacing 269 cubic inches, with a bore and stroke of 4 1/4 by 4 3/4 inches, rated at just under 29 horsepower. It cost them $12,000 to develop. They sold it for $500. That's a loss of $11,500 on their first and only product in 1906 dollars. But here's where the story turns. A boat owner on nearby Pewaukee Lake, just a few miles from where the engine was built, took a chance on it, installed it in his boat, and the thing just ran. It started easy, which was genuinely rare for that era. It ran smooth. It didn't overheat. It didn't quit halfway across the lake. The boat owner was so impressed that he told everyone who would listen. Word spread along the lake shore, then through the town, then to neighboring counties. Orders started coming in, not a flood, but enough. The Model A stayed in production for 8 years, improving constantly. They enclosed the gears and valve springs, reduced vibration, improved the cooling. Each year the engine got a little quieter, a little more reliable, a little harder to kill. The reputation spread beyond Waukesha County, beyond Wisconsin, into neighboring states, and then across the country. People started asking for engines by name. They wanted a Waukesha. By 1910, the company had outgrown the Bluefront garage and moved into a proper manufacturing facility on St. Paul Avenue, the same stretch of road where Waukesha Engines would be built for the next 100-plus years. By 1912, they'd developed their first full-size engine designed as a direct replacement for steam engines in the construction equipment industry. That was a pivotal moment. Not just making engines for boats and small tractors, but going after the heavy industrial market where steam power still dominated. They were telling an entire industry that internal combustion was the future. Here's what made Waukesha different from nearly every engine company of the era. They weren't building cars, they were building engines for other people to put in other things: tractors, trucks, boats, cranes, drag lines, air compressors, ditch diggers, industrial locomotives, cotton gins, refrigeration units for rail cars, rock crushers, generator sets. If it needed an engine and wasn't a passenger automobile, Waukesha probably made one that fit. By 1922, they claimed a range from 6 horsepower to 1,200, with engines weighing from 100 pounds to 16,000. That's extraordinary breadth for a single-plant operation in a small Midwestern city. The farm tractor revolution is where Waukesha first showed real market penetration. At the Fremont Tractor Show in Nebraska in 1913, 21 of 113 tractors on display had Waukesha engines, nearly 1 in 5 for a 7-year-old company. By 1921, 169 tractor manufacturers were producing 232 models. 78% used 4-cylinder engines. A significant share came from Waukesha. Around the same time, Horning obtained the rights to the Ricardo combustion chamber, a revolutionary cylinder head design from British engineer Harry Ricardo. The Ricardo head created turbulence and squish inside the combustion chamber, faster and more complete burning of fuel, more horsepower, less waste, less destructive knocking. Waukesha even sold retrofit kits for older engines. It was a competitive edge that helped them survive the agricultural depression of 20 and 21, which killed most independent tractor companies. Then World War I. Horning chaired the Engine Design Committee for the Army's Class B military truck. Waukesha produced the first standardized gasoline truck engines for military vehicles. The first engine shipped to President Wilson's attention in Washington in just 11 days. That kind of turnaround doesn't happen unless you have people who know exactly what they're doing. But the engine that changed everything had nothing to do with trucks, or tractors, or boats, or war. It had to do with gasoline itself. By the mid-1920s, the automobile industry had a serious problem. Engines were getting more powerful, compression ratios were climbing, and gasoline quality was wildly inconsistent. Some fuels caused knocking, destructive detonation that cracked pistons and ruined bearings. Nobody had a standardized way to measure fuel quality. Every refiner made gasoline differently. Every engine reacted differently. A cooperative fuel research committee was formed in 1922, bringing together the government, oil producers, and engine manufacturers. Waukesha took a leading role. Horning hired Arthur Pope as chief research engineer. Pope designed a single-cylinder test engine with a variable compression ratio that could be adjusted while running, measuring the knock characteristics of any fuel under repeatable conditions. In December 1928, the committee approved Pope's design. The deadline was the January 1929 meeting of the Society of Automotive Engineers, 45 days, to design and build a precision instrument that would become a global measurement standard. Horning gave the job to Chief Engineer James Fisher. Fisher, Pope, and a man named Howard Wiles built the prototype. On time, the committee adopted it. Waukesha Motor Company created the Octane rating system. Yes, Octane, the number on the gas pump, 87, 91, 93. That entire framework, used by every gas station, every refinery, every fuel distributor in every country on the planet, exists because a small engine company in Wisconsin built a test engine in 45 days, in the winter of 28 and 29. The CFR engine became the sole authorized testing apparatus. No other manufacturer was permitted to build it. Waukesha held the patent and exclusive production rights. Thousands of these engines have been shipped to laboratories worldwide. Think about what that means. Before the CFR engine, buying gasoline was basically a gamble. You had no way of knowing if the fuel you were putting in your car would cause engine damage. After the CFR engine, the petroleum and automotive industries had a common language. Refiners could guarantee a fuel grade. Engine manufacturers could specify a minimum octane requirement. And consumers, without knowing it, could trust the number on the pump. All because of a machine built by 4 men in 45 days in a factory in Wisconsin. The heart of the system was the variable compression cylinder. Raise and lower the cylinder height during operation, find the exact compression ratio where a fuel begins to knock, compare against reference fuels with known properties, and you get an octane number, universal, reproducible. By 1931, the package was complete. Standardized engine, reference fuels, rating scale, uniform testing procedure. By 38, they'd adapted it for diesel fuel too. By 41, an aviation gasoline version critical for wartime fuel quality control. In 1980, the American Society of Mechanical Engineers recognized the original CFR engine as an international historic mechanical engineering landmark. And the design? Virtually unchanged since 28. Still manufactured today. Still in Waukesha County. Still the globally specified equipment for fuel testing. Nearly 100 years of continuous relevance from a single design concept. If you're enjoying this, hit subscribe. We cover stuff like this every week. Okay, back to it. So Waukesha had the Octane engine, the tractor market, and the military contracts. But the market that would define the company for half a century was coming from the oil fields of East Texas. The early 20s boom created massive demand for reliable engines in remote, inhospitable locations. The old steam engines that powered drilling equipment were enormous, temperamental beasts. They required dedicated water supplies, constant fuel, a crew just to keep them going, and they couldn't easily be moved when a well dried up and you needed to relocate to the next site. Waukesha's multi-cylinder internal combustion engines solved all of those problems. Lighter, more portable, more fuel efficient, easier to maintain with a smaller crew. You could put one on a truck, haul it to the next well site, and have it running by morning. The oil fields ate them up. Engines kept getting bigger as wells went deeper. In 24, Waukesha introduced the Model GU, a 4-cylinder displacing 567 cubic inches. By 29, 6-cylinder engines displacing nearly 2,400 cubic inches. Then, in 1930, the engine that set the standard for a generation, the 6LRO bore and stroke of 8.5 by 8.5 inches, 2,894 cubic inches. For perspective, a modern pickup truck engine displaces about 300 to 400 cubic inches. The 6LRO had nearly 10 times that. One engine, running in Texas heat, in dust that got into everything around the clock. In 35 came the Hesselman. Named after Swedish engineer Jonas Hesselman, it was a low-compression, fuel-injected, spark-ignited, multi-fuel engine that ran on virtually anything combustible. gasoline, kerosene, ethanol, natural gas, crude derivatives you'd hesitate to put in a lamp. In remote fields where fuel quality ranged from acceptable to barely flammable, the Hesselman didn't care what you fed it. It just ran. The engine's success was directly tied to a simple reality. Quality fuel was unavailable in most of the world's oil-producing regions. So Waukesha built an engine that didn't need quality fuel. Problem solved. And decades before natural gas became the dominant fuel for power generation, this engine was already designed for it. Accidentally prophetic. The war years changed everything again. After World War II, the Hesselman became obsolete, ironically because the war itself had improved global fuel distribution and quality. So Waukesha transitioned to true diesels in the late 40s, introducing the 6LRD with the famous Ricardo pre-combustion chamber for smooth, efficient fuel burning. Then, in '54, after the war and the transition to diesels, came the engine that fathered a dynasty. The VLRO, Waukesha's first V12. 8.5 by 8.5 bore and stroke. 5,788 cubic inches, nearly 6,000 cubic inches in one engine, essentially two 6LROs joined at the crankshaft. This was the direct ancestor of the VHP series, VHP. Three letters that are legendary in the industrial engine world. They officially stood for very high power. But the real story is better than any marketing department would want you to know. The V came from the word Viscount. Not because the engine had anything to do with nobility, because the advertising manager in the 60s thought the word sounded classy. And the VHP designation was originally assigned to a different engine family entirely, a smaller, high-speed series. The vice president of marketing swapped the names at the last minute. The most famous engine series in the history of industrial gas compression got its name because a marketing executive liked fancy words and then changed his mind about which engine should carry them. The VHP family grew to 6, 12, and 16-cylinder configurations. The largest, the P9390, introduced in '69, displaced 9,388 cubic inches, roughly 24 modern sedan engines combined into one block. These engines ran gas compression stations, power generation plants, and pipeline operations on every continent where natural gas was extracted or transported. They became the standard. World War II deserves its own moment. The plant went to 24-hour, 7-day production. The workforce swelled to 2,000, the highest ever, and most were women trained as machinists. These weren't women doing light assembly work. They were running lathes, operating milling machines, working the same heavy equipment the men had worked before they shipped out. Barracks were built directly across the street from the factory to house the influx of workers who were essentially living at the plant for the duration. The city of Waukesha transformed. 20% of the population depended on the motor works, 1 in 5 people. If you lived in Waukesha during the war, the factory was the economy. They built engines for everything the military needed power for. The F-817 gasoline engine went into tank retrievers and heavy military trucks. The ICK engine powered portable generators and the auxiliary power unit for the M26 Pershing tank. Engines for 6-cylinder Corbett trucks and FWD cab over-engine 4x4s, artillery tractors, military snowblowers. They even machined and tested aeronautical engines for the Navy. The company, born in a garage where two guys secretly dismantled customer cars, was now a critical node in the arsenal of democracy. So how does a company like this, with a century of heritage and an industry-dominant position, start to come apart? Corporate ownership. The answer it always is. In '68, after 62 years of independence, Waukesha merged with the Bangor Punta Corporation, a conglomerate that also owned Smith & Wesson and Piper Aircraft, companies with zero connection to industrial gas engines. For 6 decades, Engine people ran Waukesha. People who understood that when your customer's drilling operation is in the middle of nowhere and the engine quits, reliability isn't a marketing slogan. It's a survival requirement. Now the company answered to a holding company thinking about portfolio diversification and shareholder returns. The problem with conglomerate ownership isn't that the new owners are malicious. It's that they're distracted. They have a dozen businesses to manage. They don't understand the specific capital needs of each one. And when budgets get tight, the division that doesn't fit the core strategy gets starved. That's what happened. Bangor Punta couldn't maintain the investment needed to keep the plant modern. In '74, they sold to Dresser Industries of Dallas. Dresser was a legitimate energy company with about 42,000 employees and sales over $1 billion. Things actually stabilized. New President Chester Lee, a British-born engineer who'd worked around the world, brought optimism and a serious modernization program. The assembly lines were realigned from their original 1909 north-south layout to a more efficient east-west configuration. International orders came in, including 25 CFR engines for China. There was genuine momentum. Then, oil prices collapsed. In '82, the company president walked into the sales department and found 0 orders booked. None. Drilling operations across the country were shutting down. The company that survived 2 world wars and the Depression was staring at empty books. They adapted. Ben Stewart, who became president in '84, told reporters directly that the days of Waukesha building diesel engines were numbered and the future was gas engines. He was right. Waukesha broke ground on a new product training center, introduced lean burn, low-emission gas engine models, and fundamentally reinvented the company's product strategy. By the mid-'90s, they discontinued diesels entirely. This ended nearly 90 years of serving dozens of different niche markets, everything from fire trucks to fishing boats to railroad equipment. But it kept the company alive. The Waukesha that emerged was leaner, more focused, and entirely committed to large stationary natural gas engines. A different company than the one that had built engines for everything that moved. Then the ownership carousel began spinning faster. Dresser acquired by Halliburton in '98. A group led by Patrick Murray bought the equipment division back from Halliburton in 2001. General Electric acquired everything in 2010 for $3 billion. 4 owners in 12 years, each bringing new priorities, new cost structures, new people in corner offices who understood spreadsheets but had never stood next to a running VHP engine. On January 30, 2014, President Barack Obama visited the Waukesha plant. He toured the factory floor, surrounded by workers and massive gas engines, and called it a model of American manufacturing. He talked about job training, about wage equality, about the kind of good-paying industrial work that built the American middle class. Photos showed him standing among workers in safety glasses, pointing at engine components, shaking hands. The plant employed around 700 people. The engines were going out the door. It looked, from every angle, like a success story, like the kind of factory visit that makes for a great campaign photo because it represents something real. 20 months later, GE announced it was closing the factory and moving production to Canada. 350 factory floor workers, all losing their jobs. GE said Congress had failed to reauthorize the Export-Import Bank, which financed foreign buyers of American products. When Congress let the charter expire in the summer of '15, Canada stepped in with what reports described as massive financial incentives. GE built a $265 million factory in Welland, Ontario. The company put out a press release calling it a brilliant factory. The workers in Wisconsin had a different word for it. By the time Congress got around to reauthorizing the Export-Import Bank, GE had already made its decision. The timing didn't matter anymore. The jobs were already gone in spirit, even if the formal layoffs hadn't started yet. The workers felt like pawns in a game between a corporation and Congress, where neither side particularly cared about the people in the middle. Scott Schmidt, 44, who'd expected to spend his career there, wanted someone to walk in and say this plant matters. Joe Acker, a military veteran, said the people creating the product should share in the value they create. The company's U.S. footprint had been shrinking for years. In '95, almost 70% of GE's employees worked in America. By the end of '15, less than 40% did. Waukesha was one more line on a spreadsheet. Congressman Ryan said GE could finance its own exports. GE said if the bank had been reauthorized, the closure wouldn't have happened. Both sides pointed fingers. Workers lost either way. The blue-collar workforce was laid off. GE kept about 200 white-collar positions. In '18, GE sold the entire distributed power business to private equity firm Advent International for $3.25 billion. Rebranded as INEO. Final layoffs through '19. 236 more positions. Then, in '20, INEO cut another 120 hourly jobs. The plant that ran around the clock during World War II, where women lived in barracks across the street building engines for the war effort, was functionally done. The Waukesha brand survives today under INEO. Products engineered in Wisconsin, manufactured in Canada. Over 31,000 engines produced in the company's lifetime. 25 gigawatts of installed power capacity worldwide. VHP engines from decades ago still running in oil fields and compression stations across the globe. The CFR engine, still the global standard for fuel testing. Still in Waukesha County, still fundamentally the same design Arthur Pope conceived nearly a century ago. The Waukesha Engine Historical Society preserves what it can. Photos, documents, engines, spanning more than a century of production. The original CFR prototype, the one Howard Wiles took home when he retired and later returned, sits on permanent display. In 2024, the Waukesha County Historical Society erected a new historical marker acknowledging the company's place in the city's story. The museum also houses the ASME landmark plaque for the CFR engine. Visitors can walk through and see the progression from that first Model A to the massive VHP series and understand, maybe for the first time, how much of the modern world was shaped by a company most people have never heard of. There's an irony in the survival of the Waukesha brand. The engines outlasted the factory. The CFR design outlasted every owner. The reputation for reliability, the thing Harry Horning and Fred Ahrens built starting in 1906, turns out to be more durable than any corporate structure that was ever wrapped around it. The story of Waukesha Engines is American manufacturing in miniature, born from curiosity in a rented stone building. Two mechanics disassembling other people's engines at night because they were certain they could do better. A first product sold at a catastrophic loss that became a century-long reputation. An invention that shaped every gas station on Earth without anyone knowing where it came from. A factory that became the identity of a city. Women building wartime engines through the night. Decades of dominance in the harshest industrial environments on the planet. And then the slow, familiar unwinding. Conglomerates, acquisitions, cost optimization, foreign incentives, and finally, a factory floor going quiet for the first time in 113 years. The engines still run. The brand appears on spec sheets and engineering documents. But the thing that made Waukesha what it was, the fusion of engineering obsession and community roots, the idea that a company and a small Midwestern city could grow together for a century and actually mean something to each other, that doesn't exist anymore. Not just in Waukesha, in a lot of places that used to build things. If your father or grandfather worked in manufacturing, worked the oil fields, or served in a war where machinery had to function and power had to flow, there's a decent chance a Waukesha engine was somewhere in their world, running in the background, doing its job. You just never knew it was there. Now you do. And there you have it, Waukesha Engines. the company that invented Octane ratings, powered both world wars, built machines that are still running decades later, and did it all from a city most people have only seen from the interstate. If you enjoyed this, subscribe. We do this every week, and if I got something wrong, drop it in the comments. Somebody always does. That's what they're for.